This is the Full Ton Podcast. And welcome back to the Full Ton Podcast. I am your permanent guest host, John Fulton, and joining me is the Dark Lord of Engineering, Professor Matt, or Matt as we like to call him. This is episode dos. Episodio le dos. That is totally wrong.
Forgive the lack of...
I only took like 2 years of high school Spanish. Well, no, it was more like 4, I guess. I don't know.
At least you can count to 12.
I could at one point.
Moving on.
We've got a lot. We're starting quite a big series here. We're gonna do a whole series, basically, like 2 or 3 episodes, pretty much just on Star Wars battles, an in-depth analysis of Star Wars battles. We're going to talk about them, and then we're going to talk about them some more, and we're going to talk about them, and then we're going to talk about them after that. We're going to talk about them.
We'll talk about first.
We'll start in chronological order, yes. But the first order of business today is first impressions for Solo. Now, I was not going to go to Solo, but Matt's girlfriend didn't want to go see A Quiet Place. So we ended up going, and then some other friends ended up joining us, and I kept going, oh, there goes our boycott right down the hole.
It was worth $3.50.
Well, that was the thing that made it okay, see, is that we were going to do a review of it, and then also the theater had like half, what was that? That's like third price tickets.
Yeah, pretty much.
They were basically $3.50 a piece.
Nice seats, too.
So, you know, we got them on sale. Ha. I guess.
Yeah, Lucasfilm has earned really Disney has earned a boycott, but you know, $3.50 is almost boycotting the movie.
Yeah.
So you know,
which is not to say that if you liked it that you should go away. Don't do that, because we do actually have some good things to say about it. So here we go. So do you want to go first, or should I?
I could go first.
Okay.
I don't do a good job of breaking movies up in acts very well. I felt like a lot of the early stuff was done pretty well. And I think it's because the Empire itself is, in Solo, it's a better defined entity. But I felt like they spent more time caring about why the Empire, or at least trying to show that the Empire itself was bad, not just wrong. And they were trying to show the actual evil of the Empire, even if it's just, you know, strongmen breaking up a nice, you know, stand. It was at least better than episodes 7 and 8. Where you didn't get any of that at all. There was like, oh, we brainwashed people, but we don't care. We'll still kill them. You know,
something. Yeah.
There's no like. Anyway,
I thought the first 3 quarters were. It was fine.
Well, let me say, I dislike. I thought that was a little bit better, and I generally thought it was decent. I felt like the guy playing Han Solo was either over-directed or he was just not good. Everyone else was sort of okay, and some people were even pretty good. Was it Donald?
Donald Glover does an excellent job as Lando.
Lando was excellent, and what's his name was really good. What was the guy, mercenary guy?
Oh, Beckett.
Beckett is he did a good job.
Woody Harrelson.
Yeah, Woody Harrelson.
He did a really good job. Yeah.
Yep.
There were every now and then there was a line or something, and I was like, who told you what that line was supposed to mean? But for most of it, it was pretty good. Han
Solo was kind of poor in a lot of places, but he was all right in some.
I thought the job of walking into Harrison Ford's shoes is, well, pretty much impossible. I really liked the actor. He was in Hail Caesar. Did you see him in that?
I did like the actor. I don't hold any grudges against the actor.
Yeah,
I think he himself was all right. I just felt like they didn't let him figure out what the character was.
Yeah, apparently that was an actual issue on set, and he tried really hard, and apparently he got better. He was worse before, but still, it's kind of sad that they didn't really do such a good job. And I think a lot of that is just because they don't know how to recognize what kind of character, what people liked about Han. So,
right, and that's what I was saying. I think the actor needed to figure that out because...
Well, the actor needed to figure that out, but the directors and the casting directors should have known before what they were looking for. They got all of Hollywood to deal with. It's a Star Wars movie. Nobody's going to turn down a Star Wars movie, so I don't know. But anyway, I thought I kind of liked the idea that they were focusing on the Empire, but to me, they exposed all the wrong things.
I'll give you that.
It was like this whole deal. One of the big themes of the film, not too much of a spoiler really, is that the crime syndicates are really embedded in the Empire. Apparently they're working together. But that bugged me because I was like, wait a minute, what do you mean? That doesn't make any sense. I mean, it made sense that, the Empire would be corrupt, but it doesn't make sense that they made it sound like it was some kind of team up. And
there was this really funny. It was
like the first. It was like Captain Planet, and they have the dude who's hates the environment for this reason, and the guy who hates the environment for this reason, and that's also interesting. Almost all the environments are like, there's not a lot of stuff going on. I mean, there's big mountains and stuff, but it's just like every single planet looks the same. It's mud, or it's dirt, or it's brown, or it's desert, or it's snow, or something like that. True. And everything is. You don't even see trees till I think I don't know. A couple of the really like the end scenes had some trees in them, and I was like, that's even after most of the movie's over by that point. It's like everything else is beige. Like I remember the trailer coming out for this, and I commented on it. My friend shared it, and I commented, it looks like Guardians of the Galaxy Beige Edition. And
one of the things I felt that was also kind of strange. I think you make up a good point that the things they focused on were not quite right. It's sort of like there was this YouTube video I saw one time where somebody had a story, like a Dungeons and Dragons story, and they were just rehashing it because in the story they had this town, okay, and all these villagers shopped at the black market. So then these characters show up and they're like thrown in prison because they show up and they give away the fact that there's a black market. But they're thrown in, and so they're like, wait a minute, but everybody shops at the black market, right? It's like everybody, right?
Yeah.
And they're like, well, yeah, everybody shops at the black market. That's how they make money in the town. I was like, then why is it a black market? That's kind of what you see when you look at the Empire, and they're like, oh well, but everywhere there's crime. It's like, why is it crime? Because there are rules. Wait, but they're in bed with the people who make the rules. You see, the problem is not the crime. The problem is rules that are enforced intentionally, in such a way that it helps people, Mm-hmm. That's when it's a problem.
They made it sound like some of these syndicate guys could just walk up to Palpatine, and Palpatine would be like, oh great, it's nice to see you, and they'd be like, oh yeah, I'm the head of the Black Sun Crime Syndicate, how are you? And Palpatine's like, yes, we're both evil, that's why we're friends. And they'd be like,
that's right, we're friends.
And
it's like, where on earth has that ever worked? Evil men always just kill each other. That's what happens.
Well, yeah, see,
straight up
it's
evil
like
people,
how zombies don't eat each other, and they were trying to apply that same rule to syndicates. I mean, to be honest, they do show a scene where, one of these crime guys and this governor are having a meeting, and things are not going well, just to not spoil that. But it still is kind of, I have any idea how these things dynamically interact with each other.
And it's hard to do that in as like an aside to a film, but I felt like it was part of the setting that wasn't fully fleshed out. Now, on the other hand, there was some,
especially that scene in the beginning where you have the syndicate guys chasing the two heroes. This scene's in the trailer. It's where Han and his girlfriend.
Yeah, that made no sense at all. That whole scene was
they're driving, and then they have this criminal enforcer dude who's chasing them with attack dogs.
Yeah.
And he
just blows by all the checkpoints and everything.
There's a stormtrooper on a bike that gets on Han's case for speeding. And he doesn't even see the syndicate guy who has dogs.
That's why I thought for sure
who are going to eat them. I'm like, what?
I thought for sure what was going to happen was, when I saw that happening, because this happens every now and then, is the cop sees the guy who's chasing the person, and so he tries to pull over the person in back, which is what makes the most sense, right?
Yeah.
But instead, this guy tries to pull over. Usually what happens in movies is he tries to pull over the guy in the back, and then the guy in the back's like, "Oh, I'm going to show you how evil I am," and then he throws a thermal detonator at him and blows him up or something like that.
Right.
And then it's like, "Oh man, he's really that bad." But instead, we have him chase the guy in the front, and I'm like, what?
And
then he rams into something for no apparent reason.
Yeah.
It's like he just can't fly because he's an idiot.
Yeah, it makes it sound like the Empire isn't really the problem here. You know, they're it makes it sound like it's the
they were too bungling. They were way too bungling.
Syndicate who apparently have all the power, and I'm sitting here going, this is the Empire, right? You know, they're like, they show up and they just. It's like if they don't like what's going, they are the kingpins. Why aren't they showing up and mowing everyone down? You know, that didn't seem to happen whenever a syndicate guy was around. And I mean, the focus was on the syndicates as the antagonist, but it still made no sense. The enforcers are even like pushing stormtroopers around at this spaceport in that scene, and I'm sitting there going, if I'm like an SS officer or something and I see a bunch of scums, remember, they keep trying to talk about how they're like the Nazis and everything, and how the Imperials are racist against other aliens. Well, then all these enforcer guys are aliens. Right. So what stormtrooper is going to let these guys push him around?
That's right.
He's going to be like, they're all dead.
Well, and, you know, one thing that didn't make any sense to me, and something that you see in the original Star Wars, is that the people who end up suffering, there's a saying they used to have, and they have it in the Hunger Games for some reason, but it's an old Roman one where it says, panem et circenses, which just means bread and circuses, right?
Yeah.
And really, those are things that ruling people use to keep the masses, right, the lower class, distracted, right? Because then they don't rise up and kill everybody, right? And that's also where they gain a lot of their power. But the problem, and then on the other side of things, they gain power among the elites, and that's how they keep that 2/3 they need, right? So they keep the lower classes and they keep the upper classes on their side, and then they can be stable. And that's how those sort of totalitarian governments work. You need both to be happy with you. Yep. Otherwise, things fall apart like they are in Iran right now, where they don't have the lower classes anymore. They used to have both, but now they don't have the lower classes.
Okay.
But the funny thing is the people who get most abused in that system are the people in the middle. The middle class are the people who get abused the most. The people who are tradesmen, or people who are trying to move up in life.
Or at least things are the most...
Where the most mobility is in society, you see? Because those are the people who cause trouble, you see? They don't allow things to stay the same. They make things better.
Okay.
But if you don't allow them, that's why regulation becomes this chokehold on that class, right? Because they're the people who move. Yeah. They're the people who think. They're the people who improve their lives, right? Mm-hmm. And
the Empire.
You don't see that.
No.
There's none of that.
Never really
everyone's always like everyone's always dirt poor, or
rich.
super rich, and we never even talk about the people in the middle. Yeah. And that's something that doesn't make any sense to me. Well, they need people who are attacking people who are decent people and who have something, and then take away that. Yeah. Now that starts to make more sense.
We do spend most of our time in the criminal underworld, but that is true, especially with the new movies. There just doesn't seem to be that much range, I guess. Yeah. I mean, between where
on earth does the First Order get their stuff from?
Well, apparently it's a bunch of rich people who just gamble at a casino somewhere.
And who are rich because they're rich.
Right. It's
cool.
Like, yeah.
It doesn't really make any sense. They're like, oh, by the way, how does anyone get that rich? They work for the First Order, of course. Because that's where all the money is. It's like, why? Why? They're on the outer rim. They're in the unknown regions. They don't have any usefully developed stuff.
Yeah, it was kind of like, I don't know. We'll get to that later when we get to plot stuff. But anyway, so Solo, first 3 quarters, kind of beige, kind of middling. Okay. Some parts were kind of fun. I don't know.
Overall, I would say it was just barely decent.
I'm trying. Yeah, pretty much. There were more guns in it.
That was
And there's a bit more, rascally guys delivering one-liners, which was
fun.
More fun to watch. But the last quarter just the bottom kind of drops out of it, and it just becomes really stupid again.
I felt like when I watched it, I might disagree with you just a little bit. I felt like two or three pieces of the end were messed up, but the rest of it were okay. Like there were two or three plot parts that were just weird, but then the rest of it made sense, and so there were big plot holes. But
it wasn't consistently bad, but it was like mostly bad.
I was
the ending anyway.
Yeah, yeah. I was. I mean, I felt like they got from beginning to end. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
You know, they got from the beginning of the end to the end of the end,
Yeah.
and the end of the end got us to episode 4. In other words, they succeeded in getting us to where they were trying to get us.
I guess.
Which is the beginning
Kinda.
of episode 4.
Yeah.
So,
You know. What else? Is there really anything else to say about it?
no, not for Solo.
I guess if you if that's
lack of when you say mercenary army, please have more than 6 guys.
Oh yeah,
6 guys is not enough.
There was 6 guys, and that was it. And I almost wanted to applaud them for reducing the number of bad guys, but this was one where
it didn't really make any.
Well, it
sense.
just felt like they were all a bunch of pushovers, and so what was the point? You know.
Well, and I think that was because of one of the big plot holes. Because that would have been okay if it hadn't been for the big plot hole, which for me was we have a ragtag. Anyway, I won't give anything away.
Yeah.
But this ragtag thing doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make you any better to be improvising.
Yeah.
Not necessarily. It doesn't necessarily make you better at anything to be good at improvising.
Yeah.
It can make you a lot worse in many ways. So anyway,
that's the difference between being bad at improvising and being good at improvising is you got to be able to weigh risks, and if you can't weigh risks, then
right.
you're going to turn out to be kind of dumb at it.
When you need structure and everything else. So anyway,
all right,
which we'll get into here in a second.
Yeah. Anyway, so moving on to Star Wars battles.
Where do you want to start with this?
Well, in the last episode, we were talking about how the Star Wars series is kind of unique when it comes to battle scenes because it not only does it have a lot of what most people think of when they think of, hey, what was a great battle scene? It's like the first one that probably pops into somebody's mind. I don't know, maybe at least maybe 50% of the time is probably has to do with Star Wars. And then, I guess Star Wars would definitely make one of the top 10. They're just really, really good, professional-looking battle scenes, and they're well known, and there's a reason for that. And the other thing is that not only are they classics, but they've been made over such a long period. It's almost 77 was.
It's kind of impressive. Very impressive.
It was more than 30 years ago, right?
Yeah.
40 years ago?
And that's something, I mean, the battle scenes are not something I generally criticized even in the prequels. I mean, I can criticize a lot of things from the prequels, but I felt like most of the battle scenes were well done.
They were kind of flat and in the background, but they weren't egregiously bad.
I felt like the ones in episode 3 were particularly rushed, but they weren't actually bad.
They're pretty bad, but it's almost because they're not really focusing on them. They're like background set pieces. But to start from the top, we can just start with the first Star Wars, and for the sake of counting things, I guess we'll just count they have a lot of close quarters firefights in this movie.
Yeah.
In the first movie, and then it kind of just goes right out to space, and then they have a dogfight.
So how about we just focus on the storming of the Tantive 4 and the Death Star dogfight? How about we do those two? Just focus on those two.
Well, I think the middle point is really good because it's not really a bunch of firefight scenes,
Yeah, that's true.
It's the middle part where they're in the Death Star going from point A to point B, and there's stormtroopers everywhere is very unique because it
is unique. I agree with that.
It's interconnected, and it's kind of a running battle, but it's defined by the plot. It's not a and this is where we get to show off the flippy guys, this is where we get to show off this kind of stuntman. It's not like that.
Right.
It's very driven by the plot. You have characters interacting with each other, and it's kind of this protracted, long firefight / covert.
Well, and this is something I really appreciate. As somebody who loves history, this is something I really appreciate about Episode 4. Okay,
yeah.
So think about what they did there. Okay, they run in and basically through sheer surprise. Okay, no particular skill. I mean, Han Solo's okay at shooting things, and Chewbacca's okay at shooting things.
Yeah.
Luke can barely. He's just barely getting used to shooting things, or at least people who are shooting back for sure.
Yeah.
And they through sheer surprise, they attack the cell block and they take out the guys in the cell block. Okay, and then the people on the other side notice very competent. They start trying to figure out what happened. Right, And Han Solo tries to feed them line, and then leaves them with, I didn't want to talk to you either, basically. Yeah. And that's, I thought that was a very interesting thing, because he says, Luke, we're going to have company, and it takes him a good, 5 minutes for them to actually get a team on their door?
Well, no,
it's pretty quick. It is pretty quick, but I'm just saying this
feel
sense.
Like they don't just pop out of a closet somewhere.
Right,
it
right.
Feels like
it's not like instantaneous bad guys fall all over you,
Yeah.
And I liked that delay, because I felt like it seems to have a sense of logistics, and that's what I really appreciate about it, and that's what makes that scene work. Because, for example, they jump down into the trash compactor, and now they're in the bowels of this great machine, and really no one knows where they are. You see what I'm saying? Like they're like, they have to go find the engineer to figure out what the heck happened to these people, and they don't even really find them. I'm sure that's what they had to do. I mean, if you had to think about it, right?
Well, then there's also
you're in some building, you're like, go find the maintenance guy. I don't know where this thing goes.
Well, that is kind of.
And
funny.
They're not dumb enough to start just throwing stormtroopers down the hole either. So I think that's a very impressive sense. And there's delay. You see in everything they do, there's delay. Remember, they say, oh man, they maybe they're on levels 5 and 7. Or maybe they're over here, maybe they're over there, and there's this searching frenzy, and it gives our heroes breathing room, and that's a very real thing. When you surprise someone, when they lose information about something like that, you get inside their decision loop, and that's what's going on. Even though our heroes are not making good decisions, we're making them fast enough
that the Empire can't really catch them.
Exactly.
The command and control is so slow that it's expecting big things, and this is a big theme when it comes to the way the Empire fights versus the Rebels fight.
Exactly,
is that the fact that the Empire is so big and so bureaucratic and so like they don't.
If you give them the time, they'll send so much you can't stop them.
Right.
But if you keep moving, and that's what the Rebels are built on.
They only operate in blunt force, and when you confront them with a small group of guys, they can kind of slip through the cracks. And that's just a theme through the whole movie and through the rest of the movies, is that big theme where you have the same thing happens basically in the end battle, where they say that basically if they had sent a fleet against the Death Star, they'd have no chance.
Right.
The big guns would just come to bear, and then the ships would be all smashed. And you get to see kind of what that would be like in the
Episode 6,
in Return of the Jedi. But
which is a clever strategy,
right? But in the first one, they explicitly invoke the fact that the Death Star commanders will not think that these 30 ships are that much of a threat, and they might not even deploy a fighter screen.
Right.
And or at least it'll take them a little while to do that. They'll depend on the guns, and so once the fighters are below the guns, then the fighters will come out. But they're banking on the idea that the Empire is going to be one step behind and is just not going to be able to eliminate them fast enough for them to destroy it.
Well, and that's the Empire is playing right into that, because they're actually, I mean, if you think about it, they're playing very defensively, no matter what they do. And that's what conventional forces tend to do. We tend to be very defensive until we know where the enemy is. We put our finger on them, and we know where they are, and then you hit them. And that's what the Empire does well. If we go back to the Tantive 4, the storming of the Tantive 4, right? That is a very great example of assault tactics being used properly.
Oh yeah,
it's a fixed
really
position.
Well,
your enemy cannot run. You need to take the position because of some reason, and you need to do it now, because otherwise the Imperial Senate's going to find out, and it's going to be a whole political football. So you need to take that now. You have impetus on your side. In other words, you have limited time. You have near infinite troops. Yeah. And the enemy has nowhere near enough guys, and so you force them. You force their hand. You force them to defend themselves, and that makes perfect sense. It's good strategy. It's not. That's why the stormtroopers are effective in that case, is because they're used effectively. They're not good. Stormtroopers are not. At least that strategy of assault and stuff like that is a terrible garrison strategy. You don't want that in a garrison soldier. You want that in your assault troops, and that's what you're seeing them as.
Well, and that's one of the few places you see stormtrooper armor seeming to work.
Yeah,
and
that's true.
It's written. This is why
it's a well done scene for that, for sure.
Yeah, you see them and they're firing accurately, and the opponents are firing accurately. But the simple fact that the stormtroopers have armor and the guys on the ship don't have armor and aren't protected from explosions and disorienting effects is basically the deciding factor in the Stormtroopers' favor. And that comes across in the shots, in the blocking, in the editing, and it doesn't, it really provokes an emotional response. It's not just a technical response we're talking about here. It makes perfect sense that they would behave the way that they do, and that they're able to storm the place the way that they do, and it makes them scary, and it makes them cool.
Yeah. So let's move on to the Empire Strikes Back, because we see this again.
Well, hold on. Before we do that, though, I have an interesting thing. This is, to me, an artifact of the fact that the movies are so old. They've been around for so long that we expect different things from movies now, especially for science fiction and fantasy movies, than we did back then. Yeah. For a stormtrooper to be a fairly realistic-looking soldier, they didn't have to do nearly as much then. A lot of what's achieved to make the stormtrooper what the stormtrooper is achieved by editing, is achieved by pragmatic blocking, is achieved by making them look good at what they would probably look good as, and they fill their role in the story, and that's about it.
Well, and they fulfill the essential World War II requirements for a soldier.
Exactly,
you know,
like
basic kit. What does that look like?
Yeah,
and they give them that.
It's not
generally.
It's like we don't count it against them that they don't keep their fingers off the triggers, that they don't pie slice around the corners, muzzle first. We don't count it against them that they point their guns up instead of holding them across their chest, pointing down.
Right.
We don't do any of that stuff. Nobody expected it of a extra in a movie then, but we do expect that now. Everybody's a SWAT team now, and that kind of it's got its advantages because on one hand it shows the evolution of tactics and how it's gotten more regimented. But I think one of the things that it tends to kind of cover up is we show a lot of so-called tactical way of approaching things nowadays
these days, and so we emphasize this cool looking cutting the pie slicing, and I think we've lost, in a lot of ways, we lose a lot of the shock of it. Like when was the last time you saw a scene where flashbang goes in and everyone's dead in the room in 5 seconds in a storm of gunfire? And I mean really a focused scary storm of gunfire. I don't find those scary these days.
Not really, yeah.
They're not scary.
They don't cut them very impactfully anymore, at least that they're so common. It's like, well, actually, I find that they're becoming less so. It's like I haven't really seen, I think they were kind of popular early on, but there's less and less flashbangs. Now everybody uses a flashbang as an excuse to go into slow-mo, and that just kind of, to me...
I think it's lazy is what it is.
Well, it's lazy, and also you're stretching it out, and you lose the impact of a lot of it.
Yeah, there was a book I read by an SAS guy, and he said flashbangs are worthless. He says throw in a frag grenade and patch them up after the fact. That's what he was like, patch up the hostages after the fact. I don't care.
Boy.
Because he said the difference is flashbangs are kind of wimpy. They don't really work a lot. If anybody's got their head at all kind of muffled, it's just not going to work on them. Whereas if you use or if they're not looking at it, if they've got some kind of blockage between them and the flashbang, it won't blind them either. And what you need is that to happen. But
maybe
the shock,
troops,
the concussive shock will throw anybody a little bit out of sorts.
See, now flashbangs do have that. I saw some videos on YouTube where they were trying them out, and they
maybe they've gotten better.
They dump a flashbang in, and it like dislodges the roof tiles above the
oh, come on, we did that in class with an oxygen helium balloon. So hydrogen, not helium.
Okay.
That was enjoyable.
Okay.
Heat transfer.
Anyway, but
it was a lot of fun.
But see, the thing that's why this is important, especially for a filmmaker, to know that your audience's expectations change, is because one, it informs character, but two, you end up coming up with theories like there was that theory that the stormtroopers intentionally let the Millennium Falcon go.
Right.
And they do have a scene where Tarkin and Vader are talking about this, and they're all like, oh, they're taking a terrible risk and everything, blah, blah, blah. But I think when it first came out, they were referring to the fighters. They only sent 4 fighters, and this is the Death Star. They've got, buttloads of fighters, and they only sent 4 fighters. And that's what everybody's referring to when they talk about it. Now they've kind of made it retroact. I think that when talking about it, like at conferences and everything, they've kind of made it retroactively canon.
Yeah.
It's like, that's why stormtroopers have such terrible aim. And I kept thinking, but no, it just
you can't send any soldiers. You can't no soldier, nothing but special forces.
You lose like 90% of the drama and humor of those scenes if you know that if you think that the stormtroopers are intentionally trying to let everyone leave the station.
Not only that, but nobody believes the expectation of that. I mean, if you think about it, the discipline you would need to send a number of soldiers into battle with rules of engagement that required them not to shoot an enemy who were trying to kill them is insane.
Not to hit the enemy.
Well, that's basically not to shoot at them. That's essentially to stand there and get shot at. And I don't think you couldn't get any infantry unit to have that much discipline.
Even more unenforceable because they are supposed to shoot at them, and basically
they'll just say, "Oh, I missed," and Luke's head comes off. You know.
Well, yeah, and he's like, "Well, I meant to miss," and then Darth Vader goes, "Yeah, right," and then he kills him. See, there's no way.
Doesn't make any sense.
Just doesn't. It's just stupid. I think it's important to recognize that our audience's expectations changed. Star Wars didn't originally start as this thing that was going to have all this background lore and details, and the guns didn't have names, and the ships didn't have names except when they spoke them on screen. That stuff all kind of grew onto it. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, because I just think that they didn't mean for that to happen. And when you understand that they didn't mean for that to happen, it changes the way you understand a scene.
You got to remember, there was a storyteller, there was a writer at some point.
A lot of the background came from a guy, like a lot of the backstory came from a guy named Alan Dean Foster, who wrote the novelization for Star Wars, and basically he had to beef it up a little bit because there's not a whole lot there, you know?
Right.
And so he ended up writing a ton of backstory for it, and George Lucas just kind of rubber stamped it and went, well, that's pretty good. And then he wrote also the sequel for Splinter of the Mind's Eye, which is the one which is the infamous one where Leia and Luke are attracted to each other, and that was supposed to be the lower budget sequel to Star Wars in case it didn't do very well, but it did. It just took off, and everyone loved it, and it became a sensation. And that's why they didn't make that; they made The Empire Strikes Back instead.
Yep.
So, speaking of which, I think we'll move on to The Empire Strikes Back.
And remember I mentioned earlier, I mean, when we're talking about The Empire Strikes Back, we have this iconic scene, with the enemy troops marching across, the tanks. Basically, the tanks, it's essentially a recreation of the Somme from the British perspective.
Or really any tank offensive. There are several scenes from...
even, actually, you know what it's closer to in some regards? It's closer to
Patton?
Aspects... yes,
do you remember that
from Patton.
The one with
but
the
I would also say Stalingrad. Not Stalingrad, Kursk. Kursk,
yeah,
the Battle of
like,
Kursk, yeah.
Yeah, and historically speaking.
Yeah.
But yeah, the one I keep thinking of whenever we would see that was, we saw Patton afterwards, but Patton is one of those, I think it was like 1967 or 63 or something like that. It was that point where they had all these war epics coming out about World War II and everything, and of course it was the middle of the Cold War, but they had these coming out, and they had The Longest Day, which was black and white, and then they had Patton, and these were these huge 3-hour movies that were... Basically, if you've seen one of the Avengers films now, or one of those other superhero movies that have gotten to almost 3 hours long now, and they're almost always like 2.5 hours long, these were those movies before there were those movies. They had historical epics, basically, and they made Rome and Sword and Sandal and all this other stuff, and one of them was Patton. And Patton had this one of the greatest tank battles that you'll ever see in a movie, and it was just this huge scale thing. It was right in the middle of the beginning of the movie, and Patton's basically gotten the Desert Fox, Rommel. He knows where he's going to go and send his tanks through this valley, and so Patton gets his infantry and his tanks set up, and he also sets up a bunch of artillery and basically sets up a trap.
He suckers Rommel into it.
Yeah, and so you see the battle, and the battle, for the purpose of the story, is kind of framing this character moment for Patton, where Patton's like, yeah! He's sitting there with the binoculars watching the tanks fall into the trap and get blown up. And there's trenches in front, and the German tanks are coming in through the valley, and he says, he says, "Rommel, you magnificent bastard! I read your book!" And basically, that's the joke, is kind of that he knows his enemy, and that's why he's able to do that.
Yep.
And beat them so soundly. That's his genius.
But it's a really cool battle because of the kind of setting that you see, where the enemy is kind of rolling up out of the mist, the
valley,
in from the desert, and,
right. And it's the Battle of Hoth is kind of like an inversion of that, where okay, you've got the tanks, but they're on legs now, and they're a little bit farther away, and also the rebels, who would be playing the Americans' role in this case, are also basically fighting a delaying action. They know that they can't win, but they think, what they're trying to do is delay them long enough that the base's personnel and equipment can escape into space. And what was it? We were talking about extras and how the use of like side characters in this scene is particularly good, because really none of Luke is basically the only guy to be on the front lines in this battle.
That's true.
But the battle doesn't end up focusing on him too much. It serves
it's
the
a really
plot very
interesting
well.
thing,
They look the it will return to the trenches and to a couple of these different really unnamed characters. There's one sergeant with this like big old mustache who has the binoculars, and he sees them coming in. And you never know his name. You never really get to know him very well. He just operates as kind of the face of this unit. The unit is its own character, if you know what I mean.
Right.
And
I always thought that was a really interesting thing, because and I recognize this when you look at a lot of the earlier, or the movies, the more recent movies, what you'll notice is you really don't know anybody, and you don't care either about anybody except the main characters. Mm-hmm. The movies are very self-centered in this regard. Yeah. And it's really interesting, because if you look at Episode 5, if you look at the Empire Strikes Back, and you look at the people, look at how many people you meet that you care about in Episode 5. Like, in that first 20 minutes of that movie, you meet, if I remember correctly, there's at least 2 different pilots. You meet a commander for the who handles the maybe 2 or 3 of them who handle managing the different places where the ships are. Mm-hmm. You meet, or you not quite, but you sort of meet a droid or 2. I mean, there's so many characters that give character to who the Rebel Alliance is, and you get this feeling that your characters are not it. That they're not everything. You get what I'm saying? Yeah, and that's something we don't get in a lot of the more recent movies, and it makes us feel small. And I think that's what helps us look at, when we look at the Empire, it makes us feel small, and it makes sense that our characters can't just knock out 10 AT-ATs. Yeah. Whereas now we look at it, you look at a Hulk character, and you're like, oh, well, of course he can kill 10 AT-ATs because he's Hulk. Right. But that's not that's not the kind of movie we're making here. This is an epic war movie. And it's supposed to make you feel small. Right. It's like, even in, it's like Han Solo doesn't have, like, was it in the Battlefront games? Remember, you could play as a hero, and they had extra health and better guns, and was it like, even the gun heroes in, the new Battlefront can do this rush thing, and they can just kind of run really fast and sprint through an enemy, and they'll die. And what the heck? It's really silly. I didn't know about that. That's wild. But the real humor kind of the thing is that the whole point of Han Solo is that he has skill, but he's not the kind of guy. He's not a superhero. Right. He's not super dense. He's not he's not like Captain America. He's not super strong. He's a cowboy who can fly a ship. Right. He has a gun, and he flies a ship. His value isn't that kind of value on the battlefield. And I think he's a character in a world. Yeah, I think this issue that we start to see where we can't really differentiate between people anymore. You'll notice that, like, the rebels are just all rebels, and like, if you look at Rogue One, they're all just rebels, and maybe they might be special forces, but we have really no clue. You don't see the specialization as much anymore. Everybody treats them as though they're like just classes of people, when in reality it doesn't work like that. Everybody has a job, and I think that the idea that the military is a job needs to be something that's better expressed in a lot of more recent movies, and they don't do it. They really don't. So you mean that you don't feel like a lot of the characters, like, they had a skill, or they had a role, they had a job? Right. There's something they're better at than Han Solo.
Yeah, you know
so
what?
like a spec
okay,
ops soldier is better at infiltration tactics, at being sneaky, at shooting people at the first shot. Maybe he's more accurate. He's got a better. It's not just his equipment; it's his training really matters.
Well, you know what I think part of the reason is?
Why?
Is because
or even the maintenance guys who are always fixing everything.
Well,
they're important.
Well, yeah,
you
but
know?
they are important. But I think that was it. Is that this is the Rebel Alliance is. I mean, they kind of treat them all as one character, but they're a myriad. They're a collective of people,
right?
For the purposes of the script. Basically, Han, like when he's a lieutenant or something during The Empire Strikes Back.
I think he's commander.
Yeah, you know, he might have been commander. Yeah, it was Commander Solo.
He calls him
I don't
Commander
remember.
Solo. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I think he does call him Commander Solo, and they don't get bumped up to general like in the prequels with the Jedi, where they just automatically become all generals for the purposes of this thing. All the important characters are generals.
That's right.
Because clones are just army men. That's not the way it works. In The Empire Strikes Back, Solo's kind of earned this role. He has a set of skills that the rebels need, and also he's committed himself to, like to
fill that job out. He's done a good job.
Yeah, and to the point where to the point where like he's a bad boy. Remember, and the authority figures value him, like the general. You can tell he's this General Reekin was it, and he's like You're a good man, Solo. I hate to lose you. You know, he's not a dye my hair kind of rebel or cut it into a mohawk. He's just an officer. He's a professional officer, and so are all the other guys. The guy with the mustache who spots the walkers and reports it first, and the soldiers who are all there in the trenches, and the guy who tells them that Commander Luke, those guys. It's like ion control, fire. Right. And then when in the beginning Han's looking for Luke, and they're like they have a list, and they've checked off, did everybody come in? And he's like, nope, Luke didn't come into the south entrance, didn't come through this entrance. They're comparing lists and things. Right. They've got a system going.
So much
and
build
that's what
up for
creates the life of this base. That's what makes Echo Base such an interesting place.
It makes us care when they have to leave, because these people are like rolling out on a completely unarmed transport, praying they don't die, you know, and some of these people we really care about, and we see them get left behind, and that's part of, you know, we recognize that that's part of just being part of the Rebel Alliance, and that's why it sucks to be part of the Rebel Alliance, but they're there for a reason. These people, you start to realize they're there because they believe in what they're doing, you know.
And they're professionals. They're
very professional.
They're called rebels, and they're termed rebel scum, but they're just as good at what they do and focused on doing what they do as the Empire is. And in fact, in a lot of ways, they're better at it.
Right.
You know, I didn't really get the impression at any point that if the rebels had the same amount of resources as the Empire did, that the Empire would really win. I think it wouldn't be even a draw. Like the Empire would be losing. Right. Why? Because the rebels are better at what they do. They're modeled after the U.S. military. That's what he terms when they would talk to the costume designers. That was one of the quotes I was listening to today. I was doing some research to talk about this, and he was talking about how the Empire is depicted as, you know, very much like the they didn't really talk about the communists. They kind of ended up inheriting communist aspects, but they were because they don't value individuals and everything. But mostly they're modeled after the Third Reich and the Wehrmacht, and they're intended to be efficient and technological and all this stuff. But they're
not flexible. That is
they're not flexible. Yeah, and the rebels. Costume design and their acting and everything, they're modeled after cowboys and U.S. Marines was the way that the costume designer put it, and that makes perfect sense. Well, those guys are, they're not all professionals, but they're really
all professionals.
They're really
even cowboys are professionals.
Well, yeah, but they're really good. Even if they're not professionals, they're really good amateurs.
Right.
It's like they all know that they don't get points. Or that they get points for trying to do the right thing, but it's not just going to come to them free. They're going to have to work for it. They're going to have to be good at what they do. They're going to have to be dangerous. They're going to have to be fighters.
Well, and think about this.
The rebels exude that.
They recognize, and I think this is something that's very interesting. that makes that impact of that scene really, really effective. They recognize there is no respawn.
Yeah.
There is no restart for them.
They don't behave like
the people
Call
they
of
leave
Duty
behind
players.
are dead.
Yeah.
They do not come back. You know, and they measured that and they said it's worth the cost to save the Rebel Alliance. The guys in the trenches of Hoth are just as important as the random 20 fighters odd that attacked the Death Star. They're just as important, and I think that sort of individualist sort of perspective, that the individual is important, that's part of what makes us like the Rebels. You know, there's a lot of things we look at them and we go, well, you know, I don't know about these guys, but that sort of self-sacrifice sort of makes you wonder. It's like, man, maybe they have a real good cause, even though we don't really even talk about it hardly ever. You'll notice we hardly ever mention it. All we know is that the Empire has Darth Vader and he's bad. Like, that's all we know. All we know.
Yeah.
You know, and we know that the Imperial officers are kind of stodgy, but that's almost all we know about the Empire. It really is.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, you notice there's not really any, like, they went out of their way in the first movie, I felt like. In the opening scene for 7 in The Force Awakens, they're like, and now we're just going to massacre all of these villagers. And I was kind of like, okay, I get it. They're bad, but...
Well, I'll give them credit. You know, they did something similar to that in Episode 4 in Star Wars.
Well, you know what,
but
that's
I felt
right.
like it was more reasoned. They had a reason for that. They weren't just doing it
They just wipe
for no
out
reason. Yeah.
Aunt Beru and Uncle Owen.
Well, and there was a clear reason for that.
There
was a clear reason for that. If you are looking for people who have information,
well, you know what,
it is a Black Ops hit. That's what it is.
You know what? I forgot that, and that's one of the interesting things about Episode 4 is that
it doesn't dare.
Remember the stormtroopers.
There was no stealthiness.
The stormtroopers are off book, like Darth Vader and everybody else.
Right.
They're not. I mean, they're operating under an almost totalitarian government. Not quite there. They haven't quite gotten rid of the Senate.
Right.
And
there's still something like a chain of command.
Yeah, exactly. And so the fact that they've taken Leia prisoner is a big deal because they're only going to be able to do it's like, you know, it's like the FBI locking somebody up and then going, okay, now we've got to find some evidence on them.
Right.
And they're like, Vader, and that's what that officer basically says, is he's going to basically the CIA or the FBI director and goes, hey, you do realize that holding her is dangerous because we have no evidence.
Yeah.
And Vader's like, we'll find it. You know, that's the kind of operation they're running there. That's why Aunt Beru and Uncle Owen have to die, because
they know about the droids, and that means that they might be able to find the plans, which means they'll be able to gab that there is a Death Star, and that's blacked out at this point.
And so it makes perfect sense that the stormtroopers, remember, they even cover up the fact that they wipe out a bunch of Jawas, which, I mean,
it was a little convenient.
It's kind of convenient, but
it's not that bad, really. It's done much better.
It's interesting to me because they're actually trying to do that. The Empire's not just we are tyrannical stereotype number 4. There's something going on here, obviously, that the Empire's in transition from one thing to the other, and so these older traditions of the Imperial military, where we have to kind of hide some things from the Senate, are kind of still in effect until the point where they aren't, and that's where the gloves come off, and we're like, and the Death Star is going to kill everyone. Uh-oh.
This has been the Full Turn Podcast. Technically, this episode is not over, but these two Doomcoughs dragged on too long, and now we have to split it into 2 pieces. Please ring the bell and subscribe, and if you are a sucker for pain, you can go purchase the book one of these idiots wrote all by himself. None of the proper authorities were considered. None! Please comment and tell these two they are wasting their time. No one cares about your academic history bullshitting! I rest my case. Goodbye.